So, for those who haven't noticed, global healthcare is changing in the post COVID world, and we're seeing a huge impact on the health systems at a global level. Things like cost pressure, the need for home care because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the increase in telemedicine, the shift to digital engagement and remote working, and really a evolving competitive landscape in digital health as many new companies are arising, has really driven companies like to really look at their position as a medical device leader and really look at how do they move from a medical device to a medical device technology and digital health company. And so they've actually recently updated their key motto to pioneering trusted medical solutions to improve the lives we touch. Comitech is a mid-sized company with 9,900 employees. They generated revenues of 1.9 billion in 2020, and they're focused on the management of chronic conditions, so advanced wound care, ostomy care, continence and critical care, and infusion care. And they provide a range of different clinical and economic benefits, things like infection prevention, protection of at-risk skin, improved patient outcomes, and reducing the total cost of care. So very big focus at the company of achieving the quadruple aim, and a really big focus on driving improvements in overall population health. I worked specifically in the advanced wound care space. So if we talk about advanced wound care, there's really two types of wounds, acute and chronic. And chronic wounds are driven by a number of systemic and holistic factors: diabetes, vascular disease, and lifestyle. And what tends to happen is a patient will develop a wound, and then there will be continued issues such as infection, such as moisture, such as pain, and the patient ends up getting what we call an end stage wound condition, which is things like a diabetic foot ulcer, a venous leg ulcer, pressure ulcer, surgical incision. And this is affecting a large number of patients, as you can see on the screen. And it is driving about $100 billion in cost in the overall healthcare business. So this looks at the cost of the devices, it looks at the cost of the overhead, whether that's tests, outpatient visits, inpatient stay, and the general labor cost of nursing time to care for these patients because they need a lot of care. Maybe just a quick anecdote and a personal story on why this space is actually really important to me. My grandfather had pulmonary artery disease, which is a vascular disease causing issues with the arteries and reduced blood flow. So he actually had a venous leg ulcer, which 9 million patients suffer from each year. He developed an infection, had multiple surgeries, ended up having an amputation, which is something that many, many patients end up having when they are dealing with venous leg ulcers and diabetic foot ulcers at the bottom of their feet. From this, he developed an infection, and that continued to spread and ultimately passed away from the complications. And I think that this is a story that a lot of people can relate to. And it's just a story about how this type of products in chronic care can really help drive advancements in the future to help to maybe prevent these types of issues from happening, or at least make patients more comfortable during their wound management and chronic care management. And one of the key things that we're seeing is we're seeing a lot more patients. We're seeing fewer skilled physicians in this space and less money to be able to spend per patient. We want to increase our patient participation in their care planning, and we want to be able to transition these patients from having to be inpatients like my grandfather to being able to be under remote care or home health. And that's where we really get into building a digital ecosystem to allow for a wound center without walls, as we say. what we're looking at here is we're looking at prevention and patient engagement. So, how do we build applications and prevention technologies that can help to support these patients early stage? How do we improve diagnostic and assessment using clinical decision support applications and using digital diagnostics and imaging technology, which I'll go into a lot more detail in a few minutes on. And then, really, from an intervention, treatment, and monitoring perspective, how can we leverage sensors and other enabling technologies to monitor the wound health while patients are at home? How can we reduce nursing time and still keep that patient communication by delivering telehealth services? And what other active agents in therapy delivery can we use in order to help promote healing and to promote better care overall? So while I was at Convatec, I had the opportunity to work on 6 projects. One in diabetic foot ulcer prevention, which was really a business development technology assessment program, a development of a wound care clinical decision support system, looking at a very early stage connected dressing usage, looking at a concept to use virtual reality for patient education in ostomy care, wound care, augmented reality and HoloLens applications. And then I actually got to participate in their Women at Convatec ERG, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end, because that was something I was very passionate about and very excited to be able to be involved in. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because this was really a business development assessment and really a more confidential area that I worked in. But diabetic foot ulcers affect 33% of all diabetic costs for patients. So they have a huge cost burden on patients and on the healthcare system. And 1 in every 13 inpatients are primarily admitted due to a foot related condition. In the 2 years after a wound has healed, almost 50% of patients re-ulcerate and have to deal with readmissions. And diabetic related foot complications are the leading cause of lower extremity amputations. We also see a very high level of patient dissatisfaction. So they really fear a lower extremity amputation more than they even actually fear death. And that a lot has to do with the isolation that comes with that type of a procedure and with the change in life that that drives, right? So losing a lower limb really changes their ability to move around and to be able to continue living a different lifestyle. And then finally, what we see with diabetic foot ulcers is that 1.9 billion is spent each year on emergency department visits due to the condition. So a lot of key areas that can be addressed by technology and can be focused on as part of a preventative program. Some of the technologies that we looked at to build sort of a digital ecosystem included a smart mat. So, smart mat remotely monitors the temperature and visual status of the patient's feet. They step on it every day, and it uses machine learning and customized thermograms and different image analysis to inform clinical decision support. So this really is generating data around the foot and being able to provide that data to be able to identify early stage before an ulcer appears that the patient is at risk. Then we looked at visual and data monitoring. So this was really a virtual care team who's taking that data, looking for temperature changes and signs of inflammation, and then being able to reach out to the patient and engage with them and their primary care physicians so that preventative action can be taken. And then finally, we looked at digital coaching tools that could engage the patient and help to connect them with their primary care physicians, again, so that preventative care can be taken. With this, we recommended for technology acquisition and brought that to the executive leadership team. And right now, that's kind of where the project stopped, but that was the ultimate outcome of what I worked on with the team. For the clinical decision support system, this was really a in-depth project where I worked on and worked with a third party and others from our internal group on developing the core platform that will ultimately lead to other healthcare services that we can provide digitally. So the core platform that we started to develop and that we're building the product specifications for includes a healthcare practitioner platform where they're getting aggregated data and being able to visualize and see how a patient's wound is healing and also be able to prioritize patients among many other features. And then a patient platform where they're actually seeing the healing progress of their wound, and that'll be connected into future optimization and remote monitoring and connected devices in the future. And the goal here is to develop the base core platform and be able to add in additional modules in the future to continue A, helping patients and clinicians and providing them with the right level of data, and B, looking at what kind of data can we also provide to payers in order to get reimbursement for different types of services, such as remote monitoring. So there's a whole piece here around reduction in costs and around being able to monitor patients from home, being able to guide HCPs in what type of wound care protocols to use, and being able to actually bring that all together to help to drive better, improved care. This is just a look at the design, very high level, and the data flow that we're looking at. So if we look at just the platform, that's considered a class one regulatory device. And what that means is that you only have to self-register. So it's something that you can bring into the market at an earlier stage and be able to start getting customers on board and getting them used to using some of the features, such as the remote monitoring aspect. This also helps to start creating a database of wound assessment data. We capture images. We're looking at clinical decisions and what HCPs are deciding for care protocols, and being able to look at healing progression and patient health data, both at the individual patient level and at the full patient roster that the HCP would have. And all of that is being integrated both in the EHR, looking at backend data processing, data warehousing, and then being able to be used in additional bolt-on capabilities that are FDA regulatory classified as class two. So what class two means is that they take a little longer to be able to be approved. Usually it's about a 180-day assessment once the product is fully developed. And what that would do, it ultimately would bolt on with the platform and be able to give us a lot more information on treatment recommendations, outcome predictions, and wound health assessments. And then taking that real world evidence to do advanced analytics for things like cost and care optimization and population health. So very bit of a complex data flow here and slide, but I think it shows really well how the product is structured and how the product's going to evolve in the future. So what did I accomplish on this during my time at Convatec? We finished a business model and go-to-market strategy. So we looked at 30 different business models for how we could make this revenue generating, how we would bring this to different patients and to clinicians, and what our strategy would be to roll this out into the market, really aiming to move from an advanced wound care company, an advanced wound care product, to a value-based care product. And then we did a technology development assessment where we looked at a bunch of different options. So self-development, working with an external partner, looking at products that are in the market today for acquisition. And we built out kind of a recommendation from a development perspective. And then we are finishing up product specification development at this point. So a lot of accomplishments, I think, in 6 months of time. The next project that I worked on was really looking at a smart dressing and connected dressing concept. So basically, the clinician would apply the smart dressing. It would be embedded with sensors that pair with a mobile application that we showed just before. And that would then send real time data on the wound. So we would be able to send things like exudate level, dressing saturation, and moisture balance, and that would be able to give us the right data sets to be able to make decisions on whether or not the wound bandage needs to be changed. Also, it helps to make decisions on what type of bandages are working or not working. There's many different types of wound dressings and treatment protocols. And then that data is able to be aggregated for us to be able to manage the local wound population and be able to see who's a more urgent case than who might be doing well, healing well, and not need their dressings to be changed. All of this is really aimed at being able to improve the home health care and improve the management of chronic health in the community setting. We did a lot of early stage research here. So, what we did was a lot of clinician and payer studies where we identified the top challenges seen by clinicians. So, right now, there have too many patients to fit in one day. Patients aren't contacting the physician or their care coordinator when the wound is showing signs of infection or deterioration. And then home health nurses are visiting patients home to find that the dressing is already oversaturated and should have been changed maybe the day before or even 2 days before. Then what we identified as key data sets, so this is really built into our product requirements and what we'll be continuing to research is making sure we're generating infection data, dressing saturation, and wound moisture level and fluid balance. So this is a lot of key information that will go into now looking at some prototypes, designs, and looking into how do we do clinical testing. Ultimately, this will need some clinical trials to be able to be a marketable product in the future. And then some really exciting projects that I think are super cool is using virtual reality as a part of patient education for ostomy patients. So ostomy patients undergo a pretty severe procedure where a part of their colon or their whole colon is removed due to it could be a cancer or some kind of other infection, and they then have a stoma and they have to use a bag for the rest of their lives actually to be able to continue to go to that type of bodily activities. And so a lot of patients are really scared. They push off the procedure as long as possible. And there really isn't a lot of consistent patient education on what to expect after the procedure and what is life like after your procedure. How do you get back to things like exercise, swimming, and just, how do you change your diet in order to be able to have a fulfilled life. So this is a really cool opportunity to use innovation, be able to have the patient walk through a virtual reality concept, use avatars, and be able to have them be able to relate on what life is like after their procedure and what's the recovery period and some of the risks that come along with this. We are at a point now where we are working on building an initial prototype that we'll use to socialize and get user feedback with clinicians and patients. So, making sure that patients are reacting appropriately to the concept and then seeing how this fits in the clinician workflow. And finally, another part of this that is for the clinician experience is utilizing the software to get the clinician's teleconsent and put that into the EHR. So rather than having them do the teleconsent on a separate system, we can have them have the patient sign off after they've viewed the simulation and consent to the procedure. We're also looking at augmented reality and the HoloLens. So, HoloLens is a bit more expensive than an Oculus headset, but it's got a lot more capabilities. And what we're investigating here is can the HoloLens actually pick up the depth of the wound? And then can we use the HoloLens application to really allow clinicians to visualize a patient's wound, try on different dressings, simulate different wound protocols to determine the best course of treatment? And actually have a number of clinical and education uses. So this is a really early stage product or a really early stage research, but it would be something that we would try to have clinical use cases and education use cases where we drive dressing type recommendations, size recommendations, different wound analysis factors, and then medical record creation, tying that all back into the clinical decision support system I talked about a little earlier. And then for education purposes, we're looking at can we use this for DFU classification trainings, wound hygiene, and really treatment simulation. So getting the clinicians to have real time education on the process. And the education piece is really important because a lot of times clinicians are not specifically educated on wound care. So this provides an interesting and really good use case for driving further education within the clinician population. And finally, while I was at Convatec again, I got to support the Women at Convatec ERG, which was a really fun opportunity. We planned three different events during International Women's Month, which is March, Dare to Be Remarkable, Virtual Body Language, and Building Virtual Rapport, all of which are targeted not just to women, but to everyone now, and also really important in the world of COVID-19 when we're all still working virtually. And for International Women's Day specifically, I got to MC a program with three executive leaders from Convatec and a executive leader from Procter and Gamble, who was a guest speaker, and we were able to have a conversation about making progress in gender equality at Convatec. So that was really a fun event that we had, I think, over 200 participants at, and got to really get a good sense of how we're reshaping the way we look at gender equality. So this was a very, very great experience from an internship perspective. It definitely blew my expectations away in terms of what I got out of it. The clinical experience was fantastic. I really didn't know that much about wound care or about ostomies prior to this, and I learned a lot about these patient pathways and about the management of chronic care and chronic care conditions. From a commercial perspective, we did a lot of work on looking at how products are paid for and what business models there are out there for patients, clinicians, and payers through market research. And a lot of this relates back to some of the classes that we take as part of the program, which is, inclusive of U.S. healthcare, which really looks at how do payers see the different products that are digital and coming out in the market today. And then from a development technology perspective, I had hands-on development experience in thermal detection applications, building clinical decision support software, looking at connected devices and sensor utilization, and then remote monitoring and telehealth and virtual and augmented reality. So I think a very well-rounded technology experience as well that will be really helpful for me going into my PhD research in the future. So with that, I will take any questions.